Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, my guest today certainly needs no introduction. He is the multiple best-selling author of books such as How Not to Diet, the How Not to Diet Cookbook, also How Not to Die, which I do have, but I bought in Audible format. He has not been on the show for almost 2 years. It was celebrating episode 600. We're now at 1500. Let's catch up with Dr. Michael Greger. It's good to see you. 2 years is too long.
I'm so glad to be here, and I apologize. I've been busy writing my new book, How Not to Age. Will be out in December. Just today, actually sent back the copy edited version. So 2 more passes, and then it is going to be locked for the first edition. I'm very excited to finally have it out and to be able to peek my head back up and see what's happening in the world. And I'm honored to be back on.
Well, if it's coming out in December, I'd love to have you back on to promote it at that time.
Oh, let's do it. It is the largest project I've ever undertaken.
How long did it take you to research this book and write it?
So it took 3 years. Longer than anything else. And I didn't understand how big this literature was, the longevity literature. And so it was just tens of thousands of papers. It took the whole team years to sift through it all. And it was a lot, I've never really covered. And so, with my previous books, when I did How Not to Die, I already had a lot of information about heart disease and breast cancer and Alzheimer's. And for How Not to Diet, I had a bunch of obesity stuff already lined up. But for this one, it was just a whole fields of medicine that I just wasn't unfamiliar with. So I had to kind of start from scratch. But that helped me to kind of, figure out, well, how would I present this? If I had to learn from scratch, how can I get people up to speed? And so in the end, it's all good. It's just... It was quite a mountain to climb.
Is there any small nugget you can share from the book?
Oh my God, the whole thing is nuggets. It's 1,200 pages of nuggets. It's ridiculous. In fact, it got so over 13,000 citations. I can't even, it's ridiculous. So what we had to do, so they wouldn't publish the book because it was too big. And so what we did is we took out hundreds of thousands of words, converted into videos. And so when the book goes up, like 200 new videos will go up linked to the book. So that's what I'm working on now. So it's going to be like a whole audio-visual experience where basically the paragraph will end, all right, and if you need to know more about how I got to this particular recommendation, here I show my work here. So all the recommendations are still in the book, right? All the kind of bottom line. But me, I don't like just, saying something on high like some guru. I'd be like, all right, here's all the studies. Let's go through them together. And this is why I come up with this recommendation. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it in this book because they wouldn't publish it. It was just too big. So a lot of that kind of show my work is offloaded into these new videos, which will go up. And so it'll just be very kind of pithy. Here's the recommendations. And so, but there's just hundreds of things that we all need to get on board with.
Is there an intersection between your previous works, How Not to Die and How Not to Diet, like either behaviors or things you've talked about in those books that intersects with the How Not to Age?
Yeah, it's interesting. In fact, when I think in the preface or introduction, I talk about what really sets this book apart. It's like, well, wait a second. So I talk about how there's no such thing as dying from old age, right? If you actually do autopsies of centenarians, even if their doctor didn't know what killed them and they just dropped dead, when you actually do an autopsy, you find out every single one of them died from disease. And the number one cause was heart disease, just like number one cause for everybody. And so they had some massive heart attack that they didn't even know they had heart disease, or they died from some hidden cancer that they didn't know about. And so wait a second, if there's no such thing as dying from old age, everyone dies from disease, then why wasn't How Not to Die all the longevity book you need? Because I go through each of the top 15 killers and what role diet and lifestyle can play in preventing, arresting, reversing. Well, then what's this longevity book for? Well, but then, I realized, you always hear me talk about number one killer, men and women, heart disease. But you can really think about it some other way as I started to realize that Yes. For example, having a high versus low cholesterol can, increase your risk of getting, heart disease by up to 20-fold. The difference in heart attack rates between someone in their 30s and someone in their 80s can be literally 200-fold. That age is actually a primary risk factor for many of our chronic diseases, higher rates of diabetes, and as you can imagine, Alzheimer's, cancer, etc. There's this exponential increase in disease. And so if there's a way that we could actually slow down the aging process, we could actually attack many of these different diseases at the same time. I mean, it's been estimated that if all cancer were cured, erased from the planet, the average life expectancy would just go up a few years. You say, wait a second, how is that possible? It's because the only reason you're dying from, if you hadn't died from cancer, then you probably would have had a heart attack the next year or something, right? So it's like playing whack-a-mole. You treat one disease and you just die from another age-related disease. So if we could slow down the aging process across the board, then we could really flex those diet and lifestyle choice and control we have over these diseases. So it's really working in concert to preserve the function of all our body systems, our hormones, our immunity, our skin, our on down the risk, our dental health, our hearing, I go through all the systems in the body and what we can do, every possible, everything that's been shown to work, basically. And so you can imagine it just why this whole project took so long.
Yeah. Anything that the Blue Zones has uncovered that you found to be consistent with your research?
Oh, yeah. That's part two. Part two of the book is basically kind of what do centenarians eat, right? People who live to be over 100 or 110 supercentenarians. And so that work really does come right squarely back to Dan Buettner's work with the Blue Zones. What is it? What's in the Venn diagram of the Blue Zones? What role does stress play? What role does social relationships play? What role does exercise and smoking and diet, etc.? And so, really did a deep dive into the Blue Zones. And of course, what we realized from that work is there's only one Blue Zone that's actually still around to this day. And
is it Loma Linda? I hope it's Loma Linda.
Loma Linda, California.
And they're the only ones that don't promote alcohol.
That's one of their benefits. And so not only are they the longest lived formerly studied population in the world, living longer than the Okinawa Japanese back in the 50s when they were the second longest living. And it's the only Blue Zone that's actually not geographically isolated. Almost all the Blue Zones are islands or kind of far off peninsulas that you can't get to. And so they couldn't get cigarettes. They couldn't get sugar. They couldn't get processed food. They were kind of isolated. And oh my God, had to actually grow vegetables, right, to eat. But Loma Linda is right in the middle of the modern world, yet was able to maintain the greatest longevity. And to this day is the only Blue Zone that's still around. Okinawa is now one of the unhealthiest part of Japan. And so, what can we learn historically? What can we learn right now? So that's the part two is, I think, optimal anti-aging protocol or something like that. And I talk heavy about the Blue Zones.
Well, because a lot of people point to the Blue Zones for justifying the use of olive oil and alcohol, saying it's good because they ate it or they consumed it.
Oh, but I mean, that's just a misunderstanding of kind of the traditional Mediterranean diet, not the kind of bastardized Western version. I mean, it's like people like saying, oh, the China study, so I'm going to eat General Tso's chicken or something like that. It's like, no, that's this weird bastardized deep fried meat version. I mean, the traditional Chinese diet, where they saw these benefits was, rice and vegetables. I mean, it was like really where meat, if anything, was a condiment, was a flavoring, was a special, once a year special occasions kind of thing. So you really, and, we actually have good data. For example, Okinawa, we actually took over Okinawa after World War II. And so we have records in the National Archives, exactly what people were eating. And so we can actually know what they were eating then. And their 70% of their diet was sweet potatoes, 70% of their calories, sweet potatoes, single food, sweet potatoes, a vegetable-based diet, 9% calories from fat, really just remarkably different than what we see in kind of the standard Western diets.
Wow. Now, so I'm looking on Amazon. It says the book will be available on December 5th and that the Audible version is already available. Is that true?
Nope. Everything's available December 5th. As far as I know, the Audible available, I haven't recorded it yet. So we haven't finalized the text. And so I haven't recorded it. I mean, that's going to be, I would remember recording it. God, it takes me a whole week. My poor vocal cords are damaged for a month. Oh my God, this is going to be a long book to record, but yeah. So I assume I'll do that this fall sometime. So
congratulations on another one, I'm sure, to be a New York Times bestseller. Did you have fun writing this book, or was it just all work?
This was a toughie. It was fascinating though. And so, so for example, like the How Not to Diet book, I was unfamiliar with the whole field of chronobiology, the effects of our circadian rhythms on our metabolism. And so that was like that was probably my favorite part of the whole book, because I literally knew nothing about the field. And then all of a sudden knew just this extraordinary effects, the timing of lifestyle interventions, the timing of exercise, the timing of diet, timing of toxin exposures, all sorts of things, really dramatic effects. I mean, I knew about jet lag and stuff, but I had no idea that there was these robust effects. And so I had similar experiences with How Not to Age. So for example, I have a whole chapter on microRNAs, which is we were not discovered by the time when I graduated from medical school, had not even been characterized yet. So no wonder I didn't know anything about it. I mean, we didn't even know it. We didn't even know of its kind of the whole system in biology. And so it was basically like, it was learning along with the rest of the scientific world. And so that I totally nerded out. And it just represents an entire new system of why plants are so good for us and why animal foods are bad for us. It's just like you learn about the microbiome and you're like, oh, no wonder it's all about the fiber. It's all about, no wonder whole plant foods are so good for you. You learn about inflammation. Oh, no wonder an anti-inflammatory diet. Now it makes sense. And same thing with these microRNAs or xenohormosis or all these other new exotic entire fields of medicine. It's like, oh, that's why milk is so bad for us. Oh, now it makes total sense now, that kind of thing. And so it's not so much that there's any kind of large changes in the fundamentals, but there's just all sorts of new additional powerful evidence supporting what we already know. Plus, yes, all sorts of tweaks, all sorts of new herbs and things I never heard about before, and that we can, we can improve our diet with. But it's been quite an interesting journey for me.
Well, I can't wait to listen to it, because that's how I prefer to ingest my
Oh,
books.
I can't wait to, when I'm at the microphone, I will think of you listening. I will whisper in your ear.
I love your oration, if that's a word, narration.
Yeah.
I have a question. If you would mind answering a few questions that were sent in advance from some of the live viewers.
Okay. Anytime.
All right, thank you. So the first one is from Lynn, and she is asking your opinion on why it seems like so many vegans, healthy vegans, have been getting cancer. Some have even died. And are there things that a vegan can do that's a healthy vegan once they get cancer? And what would you do if, God forbid, you got cancer?
Oh, yeah, those are great questions. It's like, wearing your seatbelt. Eating healthy is like wearing a seatbelt. There's no guarantee you're not going to die in a car crash if you by clicking that seatbelt. It's no guarantee, but we know from science that it significantly reduces your risk of dying in a car crash. And the same thing. And so when you see that, for example, in the Adventist 2 study, vegans have, more than 80% lower risk of getting diabetes. And that sounds really great. And I talk about it, but you say, wait a second. Diabetes is an absolute epidemic. Having 20% of the risk of millions that affects millions of people, that's terrible. Wait a second, how can we get below that? And so, I mean, yes, I mean, that's amazing that we're 80% less lower risk of, the Black Death of the 21st century. But that still means there's lots of vegans with diabetes. And so, what can they do? How can we reduce our risk even lower? These are all things that are critically important. My next book is going to be on cancer, particularly for cancer survivors. Like, you've been diagnosed with cancer. What should you eat for your particular cancer? We have a lot of new data now on not just cancer prevention, but cancer survivorship. And so I'm really excited to dig into all that. And so I'm going to be able to answer that question much better. But the best we have now, or best that I know of, is, the AICR recommendations, American Institute for Cancer Research, which has a list of 10 recommendations, and some of which have nothing to do with diet, like stopping smoking, but their dietary recommendations are, more plant foods, less animal foods, and less alcohol, and less chewing tobacco, if you can call that diet. But basically, and they say that basically the same diet that prevents cancer is the same diet that you use to treat cancer after a diagnosis. And so, look, just because you're vegan doesn't mean that you're not eating or being exposed to carcinogens in our environment. There's it's interesting. Where was I? One of when I was looking up polyaromatic hydrocarbons. One of the highest levels was broad-leafed vegetables like kale, where you saw, and it's like something, this carcinogen that's found in like barbecued meat and on kale. Why? It's because it's from diesel exhaust. It's internal combustion engine that goes up and it falls on these broadleaf vegetables, but it can be washed off. It's just on the surface. So that's why it's important to wash off our fruits and vegetables. But to see like one of the highest levels of carcinogens in one of my favorite beloved vegetables, I was all upset. But of course, it's not actually in the vegetable, it's on the vegetable. That's why we need to rinse even our organic greens, because if there's a highway next door, yeah, you didn't spray pesticides from it, but these particles can fall on it. And so look, we live in a polluted world that it's hard to get away from. Air pollution causes God knows how many deaths, in fact, millions of deaths every year. And there's things we can do to rev up our detox enzymes by eating broccoli, etc. So there's things we can do beyond just this generic eat plants, cut down on processed foods to lower our cancer risk even further. But it's not going to go to zero. And so we just have to support each other the best we can. If I got cancer myself, of course, depending on what kind of cancer, I would, do my best to live as long as healthy a life as possible, concentrating on not only survival, but quality of life. And whatever treatment out there, or no treatment or any intervention, I would seek them out and make sure I had a good will so that all my resources placed where I keep my passwords I could share. I want all my work to continue onward. Find a replacement for me at Nutrition Facts. This work is too important to rely on one person not getting hit by a bus.
Oh my God. Will the book be called How Not to Die of Cancer?
Yeah, probably.
Well, in how many years? 3, 2?
Oh God. So I won't even start. So next year I'm going to be on the road. So I probably won't start promoting How Not to Age. I probably won't start writing it until 2025. It's going to be a while. It's going to be a while.
Well,
hopefully I can finish it in 2 years though. I mean, I'm getting good at it. We are a finely tuned machine. I've just the best fact checkers and the best editors, and we really have a well-oiled machine without oil.
Nice. Well, I look forward to that. And speaking of cancer, Dana writes in, Dr. Greger, is it safe to ingest 1/2 teaspoon of local spicery Saigon cassia cinnamon a day? If not, what is a safe amount that is not carcinogenic? And could you please explain if there's been tests on people about this or just animals?
That's a good question. So it's not a cancer effect, it's a liver damage effect, I believe, right? It's the coumarins in cassia cinnamon, but 1/2 teaspoon is below the level of concern. I have a video about it. That may be a concern for small children at that dose, but the dose was pretty hefty. If I was forced to guess, it'd be more like over a teaspoon. But I actually have a video where we explicitly say exactly how much for adults, for children is too much. But I think 1/2 teaspoon is well under that, so I wouldn't be worried about that. If you love your cassia cinnamon for whatever reason, I'd still encourage you to switch over to Ceylon cinnamon, which doesn't have those coumarins, but the coumarins may actually be what helps cinnamon bring down blood sugar. So if you're using it for blood sugar control, then cassia, you're probably not going to get the same effects switching over.
I find that just as a chef, the cassia tastes better. It's sweeter.
Oh, well, I remember when I used to make cinnamon toothpicks, and I'd get cinnamon oil. The cassia oil tasted, the essential oil of cassia bark tasted way better than the true cinnamon bark.
Yep. Thanks. Vicky, who's watching live, says or asks, did anything miss out on being in the 21 tweaks and why?
Oh, was there like 22 and I
withheld one? You withheld any?
No, I think I don't think there was anything that I left off. I was thinking recently that if I was to expand the daily dozen, if we were going for a baker's dozen, then mushrooms. Mushrooms would be the 13th, and that's because of two things: ergothioneine, the so-called longevity vitamin, found almost exclusively in the fungi kingdom, and the only reason really it's in plants is because the little fungal threads actually feed the roots of it, and so it can actually get into plants from fungi in the ground. And the only reason animals have it is because they may eat the plants that have been kind of cross-contaminated by the fungus. But by far the most concentrated sources are, mushrooms directly, or tempeh, which has which has that fungal mass. And so that, for that reason, and then spermidine. So I have a big chapter on spermidine in the book. And the number one source of spermidine is tempeh. Lots of mushrooms are really high, soybeans are really high. And so, yeah, for spermidine and ergothioneine, we really should try to get mushrooms, I think, into our daily diet. Even though we don't have the only thing that stopped me from making it the 13th is we just don't have the interventional studies. We have really powerful observational evidence suggesting that mushroom consumption is associated with living longer and better immunity and all sorts of things. But we just don't have studies where we randomize people to more than a few weeks of mushrooms. And we have in terms of immune boosting effects, and we've been able to show that. But in terms of longevity, we don't have the let's randomize thousands of people to eat mushrooms or not for a few years and see who actually lives longer.
Well, that's interesting because one of the viewers, Miche, sent in a question about mushrooms saying, I understand you have to cook mushrooms before eating them. I purchased dried mushrooms to use in smoothies and was wondering, so I have to rehydrate, cook, and re-dry so I can grind them for my smoothies? Or can you just grind dried mushrooms as they come?
Okay, well, this is critically important that I learned writing this new book. And that is that it's not all mushrooms. It's right. We're worried about agarikine, and that's only found in the agaricus mushrooms, which is the white crimini portobello mushrooms, which is all, of course, the same mushroom, just at different stages of maturity. But it's really only those mushrooms that need to be cooked in terms of the agarikine concerns. So, for example, oyster mushrooms you can totally eat raw with no problem whatsoever. We do want to cook morel mushrooms for a different reason. And we need to cook shiitakes because of this weird condition called flagellant dermatitis, where weeks after you eat a raw or undercooked shiitake, you can break out in this whip-like crazy rash. But oyster mushrooms, no need to cook. So you want to eat those, powdered, go for it.
Great. Thank you. This is from Michelle, and she says, do we need to do a parasite cleanse even if we're not sure if we have parasites? And if so, what protocol is recommended?
Absolutely not. That's the kind of thing that's come up by that, quack doctors come up to sell you crazy stuff. Unless you've been diagnosed with a particular parasitic infection, which is almost unheard of unless you're, getting like Giardia drinking out of a mountain stream, or if you're in the, global South and the developing world. We've eliminated most parasites from kind of modern civilization. And so unless you've been diagnosed with this particular parasite, and in which case you do particular things to eliminate that particular parasite, it's not something I would worry about. It's just, these people want to make money, and so they make people worry about something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and people do like gallbladder cleanses, all kinds, liver cleanses. I'm sure you've heard about those. So this question is from Teresa. She says, I'm vegan, and I know vegans have elevated potassium levels, but my doctor is telling me mine is way too high and I have to get it down. I eat a lot of beans, lentils, and vegetables. What should I do?
Okay, so high potassium levels in the blood is not a function of eating too much. It's the function of your kidney function is presumably in decline. We should be able to eat all. I mean, we evolved getting like 15,000 milligrams, 15 grams of potassium a day. I mean, it's unbelievable. Most people don't even make the recommended 4,700 milligrams a day, but we, evolved. Our bodies really, evolved getting, 10,000 or more. And so we can absolutely take in massive loads of potassium, which is no problem because our kidneys just pee out the excess. But if you have declining kidney functions, your potassium levels can rise sometimes to dangerous levels. And so you want to treat the cause and find out what's impairing your kidney function. And so I would encourage them to get kidney function tests, go to a nephrologist if necessary, a kidney specialist, and find out, because it's not your healthy kidneys should be able to keep potassium levels within normal limits, regardless of how much you eat in your diet.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Here's a question on salt. It is from Caroline. Dr. Greger, why is miso better than soy sauce if both of them are made from fermented soy and salt? Miso, absolutely remarkable. So I talked about how, I think it was in How Not to Die, where, there's two things we worry about with salt primarily, and that's high blood pressure and stomach cancer. And miso appeared to be the only kind of high salt food that wasn't associated with stomach cancer or high blood pressure. But, that isn't enough. What we want are interventional trials. And they finally did an interventional trial where they randomized people to eat massive loads of miso or less miso, and to see what would happen to arterial function, blood pressure, and found no effect. Remarkable. The only basically kind of salty food that doesn't cause these adverse effects appears to be miso. Why is miso okay, but soy sauce not okay? There must be something in miso that somehow counteracts the effects that's just not produced in the manufacture of soy sauce. In fact, a lot of soy sauce these days, the lower grade soy sauces aren't actually fermented products at all. They're just kind of hydrolyzed soy protein, kind of like, Bragg's liquid aminos does, as opposed to actually being brewed, which is a longer process and it's more expensive. But even brewed soy sauce, really expensive soy sauce, it would be expected to increase your blood pressure, increase your risk of stomach cancer. Miso appears to be the only exception that we know of. Must be something in miso that's counteracting it. We don't know what it is, but it's not found in soy sauce, evidently. Perfect. Bethany says, what treadmill do you recommend?
Oh, I recommend you go to your local thrift store. It's always filled with, the used secondhand exercise equipment. and then slip it under your desk with some, the plastic shelving and duct tape, and you are good to go. And if you want to get fancy, there's all sorts of kind of high-end treadmills that you can use. But I would encourage, look, start with a cheap one, with a used one, and make sure that it really fits into your life before even considering getting one of the kind of fancier ones, because otherwise you're just going to end up in that thrift store with all the other used exercise equipment. So I've tried a bunch on the market. There's pros and cons to all of them, and it depends on kind of what you want. The one I'm on now has a maximum of 2 miles an hour, for example. So I can walk like I am now, but this is literally as fast as it goes. So, if I wanted to jog or anything, it's useless for that. But it just happens to be a little wider than some of the other ones, and which helps when I'm tired, and so I don't fall off and hurt myself. Some are different space constraints or sizes, or some you can kind of shove under a bed. So I would just find one that fits your life, but I would give it a try first and make sure that it's something that you're going to stick with.
How many hours do
you money?
Are you on it all day, Dr. Greger?
Well, it depends what I'm working on. So most of what I do day to day is reading. Just reading research papers. And for that, all day I'm on treadmill, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, whatever. But when I'm writing, that's sit down work. And so usually I try to do half and half. So I spend half the day reading, so I can get some movement in, and then half the day writing, something where I need a little more kind of fine motor movement.
Yep. Nice. This is a question from Lynn regarding mammograms. Would there be a greater chance of overdiagnosis with the 2D or 3D mammograms?
Oh, that's a good question. So there's all sorts of, new kind of technology that, of course, is being sold as being better, but we really don't know until, because we don't, the irony is that if it's too good, then we would presume it would cause more overdiagnosis. And overdiagnosis meaning detecting a tumor that otherwise would have gone completely unnoticed. But of course, once we find it, then we have to treat it as it, because we don't know, is this going to be a cancer that does something or not? So we have to treat it as cancer. So you can end up being a cancer patient with all the, the attendant risks of cancer treatment for a tumor for which it wouldn't have affected you at all in your entire life. You wouldn't even know it was there. So that's overdiagnosis, and that's a problem. And so we presume, so you'd think, well, don't we want the most sensitive test available? Not necessarily. So for example, 90% of people have thyroid tumors by a certain age. So do we want to pick those up? No, we don't want to pick those up, because of course, 90% of people don't die of thyroid cancer. So the vast majority are not something we need to care about. So finding them would be a bad thing. And so we always have to, so that's why we can put them to the test and and do trials on the new technology and see, does it actually, in the end, do the benefits outweigh the risks? For many of these new mammogram technologies, we just don't have the data yet.
Susanna would like to know if you know how many steps you take each day and what you recommend for us.
Oh God, I have no idea. So it's, I don't know, 14 miles a day or something on a typical walking day. I don't know how many steps that turns into, but in terms of, I remember in How Not to Age, so the whole 10,000 steps a day thing was actually just like a marketing ploy of some Japanese pedometer company that came up with pedometers. They called it like the 10,000 step gizmo, like that was the name of it, but it wasn't based on any science. So it was all kind of this kind of accident of history that this 10,000 steps came. So if you actually look at the science, I forget so basically you don't need to get 10,000 steps. You can get benefits from less. but kind of the more the better. And I forget the benefits you get at each gradation. Basically, the more we move, the better. We were built to move. Being sedentary, even if you exercise, you go to the gym, prolonged sitting 6 hours or more a day is bad for us, because the blood's stagnating in our lower limbs. And so if you do have to sit down for a job, if you're a truck driver or something, it's critical that you take frequent breaks to get some of that blood moving throughout the day.
Here's a really interesting question from one of the live viewers named Margaret. Dr. Greger, what's worse when going out to dinner? Processed vegan meats like soy meat, vegan ramen, or a more whole food meal, but with some shrimp, fish, if there aren't other good options?
I mean, plant-based meat basically beats animal meat anytime, any day. It doesn't beat real food. I mean, you're right. So it doesn't come close to actually just like eating actual, having some just soybeans in your broth rather than kind of a soy-based meat. But I mean, cholesterol actually may have some fiber, typically less saturated fat, kind of on down the list. You don't have to worry about TMAO. You don't have to worry about, the heterocyclic amines. And it's just a world of difference. But just as there's a world of difference between animal-based meat and plant-based meat, there's a world of difference between plant-based meat and actual plants. But if that's the healthiest thing at the restaurant, then that's the healthiest thing at the restaurant. It's not, birthdays, holidays, special occasions, the day-to-day stuff that adds up on a day-to-day basis. We really should try to eat healthy. And unfortunately, there's just not a lot of healthy restaurants. You may be really lucky to live someplace where there's healthy food, where you can actually go out to a restaurant and get healthy food. But frankly, most places, you really, the best thing you can do is have control over your food environment. And that means learning how to cook. And where else to learn how to cook than Chef AJ?
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Greger, you might not know this. I live in Northern California now, and the restaurants do SOS free. It's incredible.
Oh, well, you're just rubbing in.
I know. If you ever come out this way, I'd love to.
Okay, all right.
Amanda says, is there any recent research on lowering lipoprotein A besides gooseberries?
Yeah, black cumin, right? If I remember correctly, so plant-based diet, so vegan diet can do it. And I think it was a Daniel fast. So it was a really healthy, so it was a whole food plant-based diet, alcohol-free, and amla, and then black cumin, I think were the three things.
Nice. Nikki says, my blood work just came back that my blood glucose is a little high and also my LDL cholesterol. I know you've done a lot of research and reading, so wanted to know if you had advice, resources to address these issues. They're not super high, but I want to be on top of things.
Well, then go to nutritionfacts.org and type those search terms in. They'll pop up. Unfortunately, I got to run. I'm so sorry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greger. We'll see you in December. Take care, Dr. Greger. Bye, Dr. Greger. Thank you for your time. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow for Dr. Gustavo Tolosa. Take care, everyone.